the moment happened when I publicly said I was no longer going to take a booster. And I gave my reasoning. I've mentioned this to you in private before, but the reasoning is as follows. It's quite clear for me, and I don't see how anybody could find a problem with the reasoning as I laid out on my social feeds, but also the history is all there to check. I was injected in prison. Now, I'm a prisoner of conscience, so by definition, anything done to me in prison is against my will. I don't know what they injected with me till this day. So I took a stance, having voluntarily taken 2 jabs at the early stages when finally when the 40-year-olds were allowed to take it. Because for me, not that I trusted in anything, but for me, being jabbed my whole life by systems, a friend of mine once said, it's like, when somebody's a rape victim and their definition of normal fluctuates. I mean, for me, it was just like, let me get it out of the way. I did it. And I thought, you know what, fine. But I'm never going to surrender the idea that lockdowns are ever justified. This was before the mandates began. And then I went along and my critique and my concern was only with lockdowns. And then suddenly you start learning that people are saying no jab, no job. And then they say there's a booster shot that you have to take combined with no jab, no job. And you're in a situation now because the very definition of coercion isn't I put a gun to your head. When it comes to medical procedures, I don't need a gun to your head. Coercion, look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Bioethics. Yeah, I think it's Article 6, if memory serves me correctly. And you look at the definition of consent in there, and there's absolutely, it states this explicitly, that no negative repercussion should come at you for you refusing consent. That's what it means for you to own your own consent, that you're not punished for exercising it. Otherwise, that's not consent. By definition, that's coercion. So no jab, no job for me became a crime against humanity. And so the word I used was deliberately in that context. I said I'm a conscientious objector to vaccine mandates and will not be taking one myself. And that was, it reminded me what they then did to me. I mean, it began a media campaign. I was called, as you mentioned, I was called all sorts of things, and it ended and culminated with, in chronological order, a premature termination of my contract on the largest commercial radio station in the UK, with a show that on the weekends was getting over 500,000 listeners regularly during a lunchtime slot on Saturdays and Sundays, and all of it was live. It was a beautiful relationship with the public that was terminated prematurely over a moral objection. Now that in hindsight, those people should be ashamed, those people that came for me at that moment. In hindsight, why should they be ashamed? Because we've now learned from the vaccine data, you go from, let's start in chronological order of the way in which the dominoes fell. Let's start with AstraZeneca, April last year, when AstraZeneca themselves, and the BBC reports this, admitted that under 30s should not take their vaccine because of blood clots. Fine, everyone started taking Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Pfizer. A week later, AstraZeneca said, under 40 shouldn't take it either. This is last year, right? This year, April, Moderna has to recall thousands and thousands of vials of their vaccine because, direct quote, foreign contaminant is in the vials, right? After that, this month, Johnson & Johnson gets restricted by the CDC because another thing, blood clots, the same thing keeps propping up again and again, blood clots. The only one left then became Pfizer. And as we know from the data that's just been dumped, because a judge had to order them to release the data, as opposed to them wanting to after 75 years, that data tells us that over 1,200 people died in the first 3 months of their trial. Now, what I want to know is, I don't say that that's a causal link. There's a correlation there. What I want to know is, how can you define consent if I'm not informed of that correlation?
Yeah, and it is not only coercive, it is a clear violation of Nuremberg, right? There are many things about
That's why I said crime against humanity.
It is a crime against humanity, and I would point out that there are several insidious features here, right? So on the one hand, you have a so-called vaccine, and you and I have just been at a conference where many people made the point that actually that definition is being so loosely used here that it's counterproductive. Yeah. But these so-called vaccines are mysterious in their content, and the idea that people have in any way the information with which to make an informed choice is preposterous. But the other thing is that because of these mandates, you have a violation of the idea that you are obligated to reject immoral orders. right? Many people administered these shots to people who they knew did not have the information to make an informed consent. And anybody who didn't administer the shots, who was in those positions, was very likely to lose their jobs. So that is entirely disturbing. It's two violations of Nuremberg, right? It's the immoral orders portion and the informed consent portion. And then the consequence of it, I find even more terrifying.
Yeah. But I'm going to add a point, if I may. Yeah.
Sure.
So the violation isn't just by those that perpetrated it, and I believe you. This is Nuremberg level. This is why I use the words crime against humanity, and I said I became a conscientious objector because this is war crime level stuff, and it's not just the perpetrators. When you start talking on that level, and believe me, I think we're there, right? Yeah. When you start talking on that level, anybody that propagated, defended, supported, I was following orders no longer cuts it when you're on that level of a crime. It doesn't cut it. So anyone that was out there after being told this is the problem and began hunting those that were unvaccinated through their media representations, supporting things such as lockdown only for the unvaccinated, supporting things like telling the unvaccinated they cannot work, right? That's a participation in the crime. And those people are also responsible. And it will not cut it to say I was following orders.
Yes, the coercion was insidious and it was extremely broad. It came in every form, from interrupting your capacity to earn to your social group being manipulated into pressuring, right? And it's truly frightening in its own right. But I'm concerned actually about what happens one step down the road. Because what I saw was what appears to me to be a very clever move on the part of whatever this force is that is doing these things, in which in one fell swoop, they managed to remove all the people who were likely to object, right? On the basis that those people were going to object to their own injections of a substance that they didn't know much about. Yeah. That those people would eliminate themselves from the ranks of our security services, of our military, of our universities. And the problem is that leaves all of the institutions basically staffed by people who don't know that they are obligated to reject immoral orders, right? That's a genius level move. And what it does is it sets us up for the next tragedy of history. And I don't know what that tragedy of history is going to look like, but I do know that we just got a lot more likely to see it.
So I tweeted something related to what you're just saying, if I can read it, and then just, I think because it links to this point, and then I can just tell you what I was thinking when I said this. I put this out yesterday. So the optimum way to win this war against humanity is to convince humans they are not being warred upon. Premium meat is Wagyu. The cow is pampered until it is slaughtered. If you see but cannot perceive, step aside so that those of us who are awake may fight this enemy for you. I believe the situation is that serious. So what you just said there about staffing institutions with people that no longer have the capacity to make moral judgments and justify their actions by following orders. You got a situation that how you create those people, we have to be aware that we're witnessing the creation of that class. And so the cultural debates that are happening in society at the moment, part of I'm going to summarize it in my opinion, part of how I see it is the deliberate encouraging of narcissism in society so that everybody is atomized, right? It destroys community. And if you destroy community, there's no way, because a big part of those moral judgments come from community. Now, I don't care what form that community looks like. It's why I'm not anti-theist, right? It's why I'm not anti-religion. That community could be a mosque. It could be a synagogue. It could be a church. Equally, it could be a yoga center. Equally, it could be a Sikh temple or a Hindu temple. It doesn't have to be religious at all. It could be the local humanist chapter. But that sense of communities where people share moral reflections and then find solidarity in the community's mores, yeah? That they go about sort of then openly having the courage to speak about. That's how you get people that speak, because they feel they have a moral sort of fabric supporting them coming from their community. If you don't have that, if you're atomized, if you're living in a shoebox in a city, you don't have the courage to speak about anything. Because you're not connected to anything in the first place. The whole idea of speaking up seems a very abstract notion for somebody that is living in the equivalent of a chicken in a cage, right? Which is the kind of architecture that's now being encouraged and the kind of architecture I've grown up through London living in. And I think that, so back to that point about staffing these institutions, we have to look at people in your position who look at things from a bird's eye perspective. My view would be that we have to look culturally at the entire scene and note across in an interdisciplinary way where certain behavior patterns are encouraging this problem of people becoming unable or incapable of making moral decisions for the betterment of humanity. And if that means, as Roger Scruton used to do, talking about architecture, but if that means, talking about holistic lifestyles, or if it means having this kind of more sort of intellectual conversation. But ultimately, we've got to be aware of where this is happening in multiple sectors, because it's an all of society problem, in my view. And we've just witnessed how, where there's an all of society failure, look what just happened. I mean, I'm hoping people agree with us by now it was a failure.
Well, some do and some don't yet have ears to hear or don't have the freedom.
So what do you think is going on there?
I think a number of things are going on. I mean, I would say you're correct that a kind of narcissism has been encouraged. I would also point to solipsism and maybe most critically, sophistry. Many of the arguments that we are up against are so obviously wrong, but so difficult to dismantle that anyway, we spin our wheels explaining things that shouldn't need any explanation at all.